We have time for questions and comments. You can throw things. They probably reached this far. Happy to take comments. If you just speak them out, I can repeat them if people can't hear them. But happy to take any questions or have any comments. Pam.
Can you speak at all about any specific things that have come out of that innovation boot camp that that your staff have done? Have they tested things there? Are there any initiatives that they're piloting?
Yeah, lots of things actually. One of the things that came out was, one of the issues always is how do we keep people up to date with things in an organization? And so we send around emails, which I'm sure everybody reads. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Or worse yet, we send around 10-page documents, which people just file immediately. So there was a whole issue of, how do we actually connect with people? And so one of the ideas that emerged from these discussions, these boot camps, is something we called the marathon. And we literally set aside a room for a day, and everybody was invited to hear 5 or 10 minute presentations from anybody who wanted to update people on what was going on in their areas or something they'd learned about. So we had this massive it was like a movable feast sort of thing. People would come into the room, listen to somebody leave, and other people would come in and leave, and it was this all-day event where dozens of people got up and just said, here's something I've learned, here's something we're doing, something we want you to know about. And it was all very engaging because it wasn't simply a series of talking heads. They did quite unusual things. Our head of acquisitions, head of collection and development, Scott Gillies, wanted to talk about some changes in terms of the way they were purchasing stuff. And it's kind of boring stuff, you don't necessarily want to hear about it. So he sang it to us. He got his guitar out and he played and he sang about the changes. And they actually had bebop girls in the background. It was all very bizarre. People listened to that, they paid attention to it, and actually remember now what we're doing differently, which they probably didn't before. So that was a good example of where if we just approached the same thing a little bit differently, it was actually quite positive. So I advise you to start singing. I have to say that the singing thing is a bit of a weird thing at Guelph. My boss is the provost, Maureen Mancuso. And we have something in Ontario called the Council of Ontario Universities, which is essentially the advocacy group for universities in Ontario. And every university has a liaison person with COU, Council of Ontario Universities. And the liaison is supposed to report back to our Senate about what's going on. What are the issues? What are the advocacy issues, and how's it working out? And Maureen would do this every once in a while and get totally bored. So she started to sing her reports in Senate, and she would pick various operettas to use, and then sing those operettas in the reports. And I have to tell you, it was like the highlight. Our Senates are pretty boring, but it was the highlight of our Senate meetings when Maureen had to report back from COU. Which particular Gilbert and Sullivan operetta was she going to use this time? And of course, highly memorable. So, yeah.
I was really interested when you talked about the difference between mistakes and failing, because to me they were simultaneous until today. And so now I kind of think about them on a continuum. And you just said, don't make mistakes. And that's super, but they happen. So I wonder if you could discuss how to not to encourage mistakes, but to not feel like, oh my God, I'm a complete idiot as a manager.
Right. And
as someone, I'm not a manager, and how you can kind of help with that relationship, because mistakes might lead to failing, which is a good thing.
Yeah, well, don't delete the database is sort of the first story, I guess. That's one of those mistakes you made. Yeah, I think the reason I wanted to make that distinction is I don't want people to be unthoughtful about what they're doing. You don't want people to just go off and do whatever the heck they want, because it's okay now to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. So I'll just I mindlessly do stuff. I want you to thoughtfully screw up, I guess is kind of the way to do that. So you're absolutely right. There are mistakes and there are mistakes. We tend to try and mitigate that in some way. We try to put safety nets under people so that even if they do make a mistake, it's not tragic in some way. People don't get hurt or we don't lose tons of money. So we certainly do that. But you also have to be careful that when you do that, you don't constrain what they do. So the safety nets can't be, a constraint to you. They've got to be there, but they can't inhibit what you might try to do. And I think the new manager example is a really good one because, for the most part, we don't prepare people for management the way that we should. Some of us have plans to do that, and we do training sessions, but to a large extent, and it's true I think of other sectors as well, management is learned on the job. That's when you really find out how you were able to do it, what you need to learn, how capable you are. And so, the first couple of years of being a manager in almost any sector, and certainly in libraries, I think this is true, is making a lot of mistakes, not doing it right, not understanding what the implications are, what the issues are. To build that capacity into that learning curve for managers. Other managers need to give people that kind of lever, that kind of space, and our staff, I guess, have to recognize that becoming a manager is a process. It's not a switch we turned on. So, safe mistakes. That's a phrase. Yeah, question.
I know that whenever you try to innovate, there are a lot of critics. And sometimes you try to inspire these critics, and then you fail in a project. So the criticism amplifies. So when you want to introduce something new, what's your strategy of dealing with these people that are very, very negative about something else coming?
Yeah. We have those people, don't we? We have those people who would be happier to criticize than to support. And they're real, they're in your organizations, they're there. I don't know whether it's simply a kind of a bitterness in their attitude. I'm being very negative here, but people are like that, and some people are like that. A couple possible strategies. My favorite one, and this is actually quite true in lots of ways, is I'm going to forget the exact phrase, but organizations are typically quite resistant to change for good reasons. They want stability. Organizations want stability, so they tend to try to weed out things that would make them in any way unstable. So one strategy which works really well for lots of people is the kind of skunk works perspective, the pilot that's below the surface, below the radar. Stuff that's happening, but nobody kind of really knows about it. It's being enabled and allowed, but it's not actually being acknowledged very much in the early days. So it allows people to start doing some things that otherwise they wouldn't get permission to do, or they wouldn't get the resources. But it just sort of happens, and there's that tacit kind of, we'll let so-and-so go off and do this for a bit and see what happens. And it kind of takes the public piece of it. You don't have to sort of go public with what you're doing. It can be a little bit more protected, I guess. We have a couple of librarians right now have started a podcast series. They're doing interviews, and they're interviewing library staff, they're interviewing users, they're interviewing faculty, and they're putting it up on iTunes, and it's very cool stuff. But none of this came out of any particular plan. They just decided they really wanted to explore the nature of podcasting, and they wanted to explore what people think about. In their case, they're interested in what people think about personal information systems. So it's just happening. They're using library resources. They've got some money to do this with, but it is completely under the radar. And if it works, maybe it'll become a bit more visible. If it doesn't work, no one will really know that much about it. So I think this kind of skunk works approach is one way to diffuse that kind of negative criticism. I think the other one, though, and it's a longer term issue, is how come people are thinking that way? What's the issue that's causing people to have that innately kind of negative reaction to change and innovation? And it's back to what I talked about before, I think, about orthodoxy and a real wrestle within the profession about where we want to go and what we want to leave behind. And it may be a real good thing to surface that. So, how come? Where's this coming from, and how can we maybe at least put it on the table, even if we can't necessarily change their minds? We can at least get them to think about why they're that way, why they've got that kind of perspective or attitude. But you can't let those people shut down innovation. Absolutely can't. And sometimes there are people in power, and I said one of the barriers are people like me. I can be a real barrier there. Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on something that you said, that we don't prepare managers the way that we should. Mm-hmm. In a nutshell, can you say what we should be doing?
Yeah, a couple things. I think we have to dissolve the distinction between management and the positions people are in. So one thing that I think is true of a lot, I think certainly true of a lot of the newer staff that we're hiring, is they don't actually want to be managers, but they want to manage things. So they want to be project managers. They want to be managers around innovations and changes and initiatives. But they don't want to be a manager in the sort of classic sense of the word. So for me, what that means is they want to do everything a manager does. They just don't want the job title. And I think that's great, actually. So part of it for me is dissolving this position perspective about management, that you are a manager when you end up in that position, as opposed to we have managers in almost every place in our organization. They just manage from a different place. I know that EPL is doing this leadership from every place, and I think that's the same sort of attitude, that it's not about a position, it's about what we need to get done. So then, if that's the case, then you want everyone to have an understanding of project management, about working in teams, about resolving conflict around people, all those wonderful skills you end up learning when you become a manager because you're confronted with it. We could inculcate in our staff much earlier. And we're doing some of that through some of the work we're doing. I think EPL is doing some of that here with a number of their very interesting projects. Very interesting. So to me, it's that dissolving the boundaries that are very helpful. And then when you do become an official, formal manager, you've got a lot of that skill set under your belt. Yeah.
I guess I'm sort of wondering about the extent to which having your failure sort of acknowledged as a success in its own way is about your own ability to market it and speak of it in those sort of positive terms, rather than having it perceived as a mistake. That is your own ability to talk up the benefits of your failure, I guess?
Yeah, you're sort of thinking this is sort of a spin factor here a bit. Yeah, and I think you're right to a certain extent. I right now, talking about failure is not a very common, popular thing to do. People don't want to do that. They shy away from it. It's problematic. So I do think the early adopters of the failure group, of the fail camps, have to be really out there. And they have to put that spin on it. They've got a bit over the top. The fail camp I mentioned at Internet Librarian was very over the top. It was a lot of fun to participate in, and at some point it was kind of silly at the end. But it was encouraging other people in a different way, in a more local way, to do the same thing. And so it's role modeling, I guess. And the more that people like that, people like me, talk about our failures, the easier it is for people who maybe can't quite put that public spin on it, aren't quite as articulate about it. It's now okay for them to do that, because they've probably got great ideas, but they may not be as comfortable defending them or explaining them or talking about the failures they might have. In a sense, it's funny stuff to talk about, but you want a mainstream failure. Right now, failure is kind of viral and it's a bit of a buzz. We want failure to be more mainstream, and everybody can do it, right? It's an equal opportunity possibility. Yeah.
So then is the point of talking about failure to make people more willing to take those risks?
If people talked about it more, would they be more willing? Yeah, I believe so. I absolutely believe so. That the more they see others being okay about it, the more they're likely to risk some things and try some things themselves, knowing that there's no repercussions. I mean, I think that's the other piece that we didn't really talk about a lot, is that people are worried that there's going to be some sort of a negative result here. There's a retribution of some sort. I'm working with a woman who's trying to do some work around this in a public library system, and her first concern was, well, what will happen if people turn on each other and sort of, well, now I know why things are screwing up. It's because you made this terrible mistake, and it becomes not a supportive environment at all, but quite a difficult one. So building in some safeguards in there so that people can feel safe in doing that. And again, I came back to the thing I said earlier. The very first thing is that the people in positions of responsibility, and I'm going to say positions of power, because I think that truly is probably the right word here, need to be the first ones out of the gate. Yeah, question over here.
How does an organization go about that encouragement of dissonance without it becoming something that's very horrible?
Yeah, the dissonance thing is something I think we don't think about libraries doing as much as we should, creating opportunity for ways of challenging our communities. You, EPL, are you from EPL? Yeah, you folks have done something which I think is brilliant, which we've done as well, which I think is a good example of that, is the human library, the living library. thing, where you consciously put people in connection with each other that have very, very different ideas. That you find, you know, the Palestinian, and you sit them down with the person who's, you know, fervently supporting Israel, or you find the people who are on both sides of the abortion issue, and you have them sit down together and talk. That is intentionally creating that dissonance. It's creating the opportunity for dissonance in a very different way than simply putting books on shelves that have those ideas. It's much more visceral, it's much more impactful, and we use the library, you've used the library as a platform for some very difficult face-to-face discussions, but in an environment which is quite safe as well. So I think it really is important for us to create events, to create awarenesses that really do challenge people in very significant ways, whether it's through something like a human library, or whether it's through consciously using the library as a platform for art or for performance. We've run performance art in the library a number of times where stuff just happens, and people are quite, you know, uncertain about what it is, whether they should complain about it or whether they should listen to it. But it's part of creating a little bit more tension in that facility, which is, I think, powerful. So I think those are a couple of examples of how we can. I know you want to generate dissonance, but you want those challenging ideas to come to the surface in a more obvious, visceral kind of way, and we can do more of that. Yeah.
You spoke earlier about library baggage and orthodoxy, and about how a lot of assumptions are no longer valid. And I was wondering if you could just touch on some of those assumptions that you no longer believe are valid.
Yikes. Oh, gosh. This is where you want to turn off the cameras. That's a good question. One of the things which is tough for us to accept is that users don't need us as much as they used to. We really don't want to go there. We really think that we're pretty important, and that if they just came to us, if they just recognized the kinds of expertise and skills we had, we'd be so wonderfully helpful, and we are. But they don't need us as much as they used to. They can do a lot of what we used to do for them on their own. And I still think we kind of cling to this. We still create services or create systems that still put us in the middle, as opposed to putting the user in the middle. So I think we cling to that one. We think we cling to a number of things which we think are valuable, but our users actually don't use anymore. I'll tell you my favorite, this always gets me into real trouble, is the reference desk. I really, really, really want to blow up the reference desk. I really want it to disappear completely. I think in a learning environment, which is where I spend most of my time, giving people answers is totally the wrong pedagogical approach. We've been so shaped by a service culture that we think the thing to do is to help people by giving them stuff, as opposed to help people learn to be learners. So one of my fantasies is to, first of all, get rid of the reference desk completely. Sorry about all those reference librarians who are here. And you know how you have signs in the library, the washroom is here, the little arrow? I want to put a big sign in front saying, where is the washroom? That would be the sign. That would be the, and then your job to figure out where the washroom is. Now we might have some accidents, I know. But when you think about it, if you go into any building, public building, you know there will be washrooms in there. Where do you think they're going to put the washrooms? You actually learn about building design by having to figure that out. Oh yeah, well, washrooms aren't in the middle of the building. They're always, somewhere over here to the side and the back. So you'd actually find the washrooms. But it would be a learning experience that you would learn about buildings, you'd learn about design, and hopefully you got there in time. So I do think the balance here between libraries as service institutions and libraries as learning institutions is one where we're a little bit out of whack. I think we have to be more learning institutions and less service institutions in that kind of model. So there's a couple. They'll probably take away my library degree now. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
It's also kind of like when you're thinking of the library as like a service or something that people use, it's also like a label that you put on the people who come to use the library. Are we labeling them as customers, or are we labeling them as people who are actually
Yeah, that's a great observation. I don't know if people could hear this. It was this perspective that we label our users in certain ways, and I think you're saying that kind of types them in certain ways. So if we call them customers or clients, we're kind of imposing on them a certain kind of relationship that we have with them, and that shapes what we do for them, what we don't do for them. I've been recently thinking about the communities we work with as partners. Not clients, not users, not all those other words, but partners. Because more and more, what we do together. We do as a kind of a collaborative, and so it's not us serving them or them using our stuff. It's us collaborating or partnering on those things. And I think we'll see that kind of attitude more and more in all libraries, where we're actually working together, and it's not, we've even talked about the community as if it's something out there, as opposed to it's the community that's in here, and we're a natural part of that. So I completely agree that those words, those metaphors can really get in the way and shape our directions, and sometimes in a very negative way. It's a good observation. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, it's back. I didn't see you there.
Hi, I just to back up a moment, to go back to the mistakes and failures, and you talked in terms of, when those things go wrong, to overcome the negativity by putting a spin on it, at least initially. I think perhaps one might think of it if you learn from them, and to me, that's a bad mistake versus a good mistake.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with how big the mistake was, or whether you blew away the whole database. It's what did you learn from it?
Right.
And if you're able to learn from that mistake and show others that you've learned from it, then it's not a mistake.
Right.
And it's not a failure if you also learn from it. So what is it that you have learned? And having those open conversations, I think would be really powerful.
So I completely agree. It's reframing those events in a different way, as a learning event, not as an event where you've made a mistake or whether it was a failure. It becomes part of a learning continuum. I mean, think about it. I mean, we know this stuff so intuitively. How many people play video games and don't look around your colleagues, right? How many people are in World of Warcraft? Oh, very cool. Excellent. You think about how you play video games where you mess up over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, it's the ability, the redo thing is like the greatest possible invention ever. Why can't we redo learning in organizations? Why can't we have the redo button for our libraries or for our universities? We are so anal about, you get one crack at it. If you screw up, okay, it's a failure. As opposed to, okay, you didn't do it, redo. Press that redo button until it works out. And it's in that redoing that you become good at that game, you become good at that process. And we're so bad at that. We really have a terrible attitude towards trying and trying again. So I would completely agree with you. Reframing it in the language of learning is probably the best way to think about the positive side of not getting it right the first time, or the 100th time for that matter. I really screw up badly at video games. Great observation. Yeah, over here.
I just had a comment just about the whole idea of failure. I took an improv course once, and the leader of the improv course, she had this phrase that we were all supposed to repeat very loudly, and it was, "We suck and we love to fail."
Yeah.
I just didn't know where it's really got over the idea that, because you have to take risks in improv, you have to just do stuff, and it might fail.
I love that example. I'm going to steal that. How many people have taken an improv course? Excellent. Oh, I have not done this yet. I really need to do this. A number of my colleagues have done this and have had the same kind of reaction that you've had, which is it's absolutely liberating in doing the work they do and thinking about things and being much more comfortable with themselves, actually, in situations. There's something we ought to do. Institutionalize improv. That would be perfect. Cool. Yeah.
You had touched briefly on one point about orthodoxy and baggage being one of the barriers to a culture of failure and innovation. And often it can be observed that an expression of this of orthodoxy is activities that are essentially falsely innovative. You take the pedestrian activities that have been doing and repackage them in a shiny new way and say, hey, look at our wonderful innovative activities.
Right.
How can this observed behavior be brought up and addressed while still maintaining diplomatic relations?
Oh, this is what I want you folks to answer this one.
It's open for discussion.
It's a great question. Thank you for that. A couple of true confessions, I guess. I definitely am a bright, shiny object guy, and that's a problem for me. You know, I will get my head turned by all sorts of interesting things, and in some ways that's a good thing. In some ways that's not a good thing. But I can also be accused, I think, of doing what you're suggesting, which is, okay, let's just repackage this thing, and it's really just, you know, the old idea of new clothing, and it wasn't good the first time around, it isn't necessarily good this time, and it kind of gets by. You know, I don't know, I'm delighted to hear other people's comments here. It's such an interesting question. I was thinking about it in terms of organizational power. I'm very interested in organizational power, and we don't talk nearly enough about power in organizations these days. It's sort of a unpopular topic, but power is very interesting now in terms of who has it, where it comes from, and how it gets wielded as we become more democratic, as we have tools, social tools, for example, that allow people to exert power. But I'm thinking about your question in terms of people who have the power and influence to kind of spin this certain ways and to promote an agenda, in a sense, by using, you know, the bright shiny object as a way of selling something that they want to preserve in some way. So I'm not sure what to do with your question, but it's a great question. Any other comments about that one? People experience that? It's probably something that happens a lot in organizations. Let me think about that one. Good stuff.
Well, I think it speaks to the dissonance doctrine and how does an organization go about encouraging that without things turning hurtful.
And you know, as we related it back to orthodoxy, it's a kind of a way of protecting something by wrapping it in different clothing, and it's divisive and coercive in the same kind of way. It's a very, I don't know. You think new technologies are doing that now? Do you think there's some of that happening? Yeah.
To a degree, it could also be related to the career advancement question, where it's, you know, we're going to be an innovative culture, and to get ahead, you have to be innovative, but what if you just don't really have an idea? And so that repackaging also becomes a way of display and demonstration where there isn't necessarily true substance behind it.
Yeah, you know, this is another great observation, which is, you know, do we then all have to be innovative and creative? And so are we compelled to do this? It's, you know, the new black or something, whatever that is. And, you know, I think that people feel a lot of pressure to do that then as a result. I'm going to say, though, that there's the problem, too, that we talk about creativity as if it's this big, mysterious, strange thing and only certain people get to be there. That's not good, right? We're all creative in our own ways. We do it every day. So, you know, I think one of the solutions to that for me is demystifying creativity. And in a way, that's what the boot camp was trying to do. Everybody's got a creative gene. Everyone's got a way of expressing themselves differently. And we need to bring that into the mainstream and kind of move away from this idea that, you know, great artists are born, not made. We can all be creative in our own way. So to me, that's one of the other challenges. Don't feel pressured to be innovative. It's not a bar you have to reach. It's a capacity you have to let out. And we can all do that in one way or another. But you're right. You could see it's becoming coercive again and bad. I have to be innovative. I better do something innovative, or I'm not going to be successful. That would be a horrible result from this. Yeah.
I think that when we're questioning whether we're going to make mistakes or fail, we have to go into it with an uncertainty, and you can't really judge till the end, and you don't know what's going to be. You don't know whether it's going to be a mistake, just a mistake, or a failure. But if we go into our innovations thinking that we know everything and with no uncertainty, I don't think that we're going to get better.
So it's why, for me, ignorance is bliss. Because, if you don't really know, but you're willing to stick your toe in, then you kind of got a freedom that you otherwise wouldn't have. But you're right. I think we don't know what the outcome will be. So there's a certain amount of courage, I guess, involved in doing some of this stuff. We don't talk. There's another word we don't use a whole lot in our organizations: courage. We could use that word a bit more. Yeah.
Reading recently on leadership, somebody talking about leaders need time to think, they need solitude, they need to contemplate, and oftentimes the first idea is not the best idea. The second idea is still often not the best idea. Sometimes your third idea is really the one you should be going with. So how do we build spaces for staff to give them the time to get to that third idea?
Yeah, and where do those third ideas come from? Sometimes solitary thinking and sometimes mixing it up with others. So we need to create diverse spaces. You know what I really like as a model? We never pulled this off in our IT shop, but I really, really wanted to do this. The Google idea of 20% of your time is your time to do stuff. It's not you get to do anything you want. You've actually got to put a proposal for it, I'm doing this. But the idea is it can come from you, and if you can justify spending that time on it, go for it. We couldn't quite do 20%, but we really wanted to do something like 10% or something like that. That just here's time for you. You're professionals, you've got huge expertise, you see the world around you. Think about something. We're trying to move in that direction a bit more, to give space, not necessarily physical space, but kind of mental space, if you will, that people can think about. And I think the more you do that, the more you discover that it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you start using it in other contexts as well. So if I was to do this for a couple of weeks in a kind of a controlled environment, all of a sudden that muscle's working 24/7. So maybe we need to think of it as kind of a staff development thing, how to grow that muscle. And then it doesn't maybe matter whether I'm in a quiet room or I'm in a subway or a bus. The same muscles flexing and working and doing good things for me. It's sort of this. It's the examined life, isn't it? It's the thoughtful reflection.